welcome to another edition of Turned Out a Punk. I'm your host, Damian Abraham, and once again, I'm bringing you a conversation with someone who grew up listening to punk, may or may not still be involved with punk, but had their life changed by the genre in a major way. And today on the show, not one, not two, but three guests from AMYL and the Sniffers. Amy, Gus, and Declan are on the show today, and this is a fun one. It's a lot to manage with three guests, but we get through it. We'll get to more on that in 1 second. But first, if you would like to get in touch with me, head over to the email address turnedoutapunkpodcast@gmail.com. That is run by my brother and show producer and guest booker extraordinaire Tristan Abraham, and he will get the message to me. You can also find me on various forms of social media at Left4Damian. If you want to support the show, the best way to support the show is just by telling all your friends about it, letting everyone know that you enjoy this podcast. We have all sorts of guests on it, and tell them to check it out. You can also support the podcast, though, by subscribing to it and rating it on iTunes, and thank you to everyone that does do that. I really do appreciate it. Every time. It's like, oh, very nice. Thank you very much. You can also head over to patreon.com, and a huge thank you to everyone that does do that, and check out some of the stuff that I put up over there. Footnotes, hit lost episodes, videos of episodes. There's just tons of stuff over there. So you can check that out. And thank you to everyone that does do that. It really does help keep the show going. And speaking of keeping this show going, this show would not be possible with the kind folks at Vans who came aboard a few years ago and said, Damian, do what you do, but just don't do it out of your own pocket. And they helped me cover the cost of doing this thing, and for that, I am internally grateful to them. And also, I long for the day for the return of the House of Vans. It's funny, I was in Chicago. I'll get to that in a second. The disaster of my trip to Chicago. But anyway, I went to go to Chicago this weekend. Had a great time in Chicago, I should say. But walked by the Vans there and saw the Channel 66 studio. And my gosh, I long to be back at that House of Vans in Chicago. But one day, that will return. Until that time, thank you very much to Vans for supporting this podcast continually. All right, on to fucked up news. I play in a band called Fucked Up, and my God, the situation this week, or last week, was not so great for Fucked Up. First of all, our tour with Faith No More got canceled at the last second. I'm sure you can find out more information on all that. And obviously our full support goes out to Faith No More and Mike Patton, obviously, as well. But after, we thought, okay, well, we'll still go to Chicago and we'll play Riot Fest. Luckily, I flew down with Lauren on some air miles that I'd been saving up. Lauren being my long-suffering partner and wife. We went down there and we're going to have a little vacation. Thought you'd come and see Fucked Up play at Riot Fest. Well, long story short, we had a member that could not get across the border due to their brief quarantine time in Canada not being long enough for this thing in America, which subsequently has changed now, so it would have been long enough if the show had been this weekend. Anyway, Fucked Up did not get to play Riot Fest, but I still went down there with Lauren, had an amazing time. Shout out to my buddy Big Joe. Shout out to Mark Hurst. Shout out to my bud MVP who flew up to hang out. Darby Allen, who flew up to hang out, and everyone else I met and hung out with. And then a huge thank you to Rise Against, who hit me up and said, last minute, you want to come do a song with us? And my gosh, what a cool group of people. If you've not heard their episodes, and this is not to plug their episodes, but listen to them, because you will really hear that this is, and I've been around a lot of different bands, this is probably the most down-to-earth big rock band, like the biggest band that's the most down to earth, if that made any sense, because they are just some awesome salt of the earth people, and I really enjoyed getting to sing with them. Anyway, we had a good time in spite of all the setbacks with Fucked Up. Fucked Up didn't have a good time. I don't think that van ride back to Toronto would have been very much fun at all. No, I guarantee it would not have been very much fun at all. I can promise you that. But anyway, Fucked Up, the band, is reissuing Epics and Minutes finally on vinyl on the amazing Get Better Records. You can pre-order that now from them. You can also find out that we are putting out Year of the Horse on Tank Crimes. If you go over to tankcrimes.com and you can find out more information about ordering it. And finally, Matador Records is reissuing David Comes to Life, and we will be doing a tour for it, knock on wood, in January. We will figure out getting into America better if the situation is still hospitable to touring in any sort of way. And but anyway, so yeah, hopefully, knock on wood, we will be going to play David Comes to Life all over the United States, all over the United States, all over Europe, or all over the UK so far. I don't think we've talked about any European dates. Anyway, that stuff's all coming up in the new year. You can find out more information about that over at fuckedup.cc. All right, on to today's show. Today on the show, one of the coolest bands going, AMYL and the Sniffers, are here. Now, originally I thought I was just going to be talking to Amy, and then Declan came on and Gus came on, and we decided to just make a party out of it and have a really good time. Unfortunately, this episode is not, one of the longest ones. As I say, it's a little harder to wrangle 3 guests for the format of this show, but we have a good time. I think it's a fun episode talking to a band that really is the band that's carrying on that flag for Melbourne rock and roll and Australian rock and roll in the greater sense. We get into all of this and why Australia loves rock and roll and, all that sort of fun stuff. But AMYL and the Sniffers have put out a brand new album. The album is available now on Rough Trade. Comfort to Me is the name of this thing, and it is awesome. They are a very exciting band, and I'm not going to ramble on anymore. Sit back, relax, and enjoy Amy, Declan, and Gus, AMYL and the Sniffers, -1 on Turned Out a Punk. Deck, Amy, Gus, welcome to Turned Out a Punk. Thank you for coming to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Well, this is going to be, I don't think I've ever, no, that's not true. I have interviewed more than 2 people at once, but I normally have a system worked out for picking who goes first on this show, because I'm going to ask you how you got into punk, and then we'll just go from there. But I'm also really excited to talk to you, because when Ambrose was on from Gizzard, he mentioned that you were the people that made him understand that his dad was actually in cool bands, and I love his dad's bands, so we're going to have a lot to talk about.
Awesome.
But the way we start the show is I'm going to ask you how you got into punk. And so to decide who goes first, I have in my mind picked a number between 1 and 10. Will each of you select a number? I will write this number down, so I'm not going to be lying when at the end of this thing. Okay, so pick a number between 1 and 10. Deck, go first. Yeah.
8.
4.
7.
Fuck yeah. Yeah, I remember the first time I ever came across the genre. I'm from a small town called Mullumbimby, which is pretty hippie and pretty bogan. Bogan, I guess, the equivalent's maybe like hillbilly or something. And like just country people. And somebody took me along to an all ages kind of punk hardcore show in a town called Lismore. And I remember just seeing everybody thrashing around, and like it was kind of violent. It was really small, like there's probably only 50 people there, and it was sweaty and they were yelling, and I was like, this is for me.
I don't remember like the specific like moment or anything when, I don't know. All I remember is being in like grade 7 or something and just thinking like the Sex Pistols were really fucking cool and like that sort of thing. Maybe like School of Rock, maybe watching School of Rock and that sort of shit, turning me on to bands, I guess.
Absolutely. Okay, and Deck, yourself, when was the first time you ever came across the word or this genre?
I guess playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater. There's like lots of punk in those games, so that was my musical awakening for many genres.
Yeah, it's amazing how those soundtracks are such a jumping on point for people, and it's kind of coincides with like, I guess, the decline of the importance of record stores, where these games wind up becoming an on-ramp to alternative culture for people, because Yeah, they're not playing that stuff on the radio.
No.
Maybe in Australia they do. Well, maybe on like Shock TV or something, like late at night or something, they play some of that kind of stuff, I guess, or Triple J plays it. I guess that's the thing is, culturally, I guess in Australia, punk feels a lot closer to the surface than it does in Canada or even in the US, I think.
It's hard to kind of gauge it really because, yeah, it's like there's lots of community radio stations. There's pretty much like one large, Triple J, which is a blanket kind of radio station for any kind of alternative music. It's called a youth radio station, but they play just lots of different stuff, really. And they have like a whole show dedicated to hardcore and punk and everything like that. And they slip a couple of punk tracks in here and there. But because it's like people rely so much on community radio, it is probably closer, I reckon. And as well, just we're all not from a city. Well, Declan's from a city, but it's barely that. So it's like you just get introduced to stuff in a more broad way. Like the only way I kind of enjoyed it was live music or whatever. Like when I go to see a live show at one of those old ages things like youth centres or whatever, that's where I just loved it there. Whereas I didn't know how to find any of it recorded. And I'd buy their CDs for like $5 and they're usually shit.
That's the thing is it is such a live energy kind of music, hardcore, and especially when you see a band in a place like a community center where there's no sound system or there's minimal sound system and like it's not the sonic that carries it, it's the energy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I don't know, where'd you kind of go from hearing these bands on these various places? Like where was your next entry point? Like who were some of the local bands that were kind of happening for you at that time, or even international bands for all of you?
I can't even remember. I remember there was a band called Purple Mercy, which was one of the first records I bought from overseas or whatever. That was dope as a kid, but I can't even remember what the jumping point was into like finding other stuff.
What about yourself, Declan?
I mean, I guess like I was listening to like Beastie Boys when I was in high school, who had like their own punk songs that I would just sort of dabble in. But I remember like I didn't really get like fully into punk until I was an adult, and I actually saw a Canadian band called The Nodes, and that was like this gig where I was like, I'm gonna be a punk, and a bunch of like local Australian bands were playing that, like Cunts, who else was that? Oz Mutants, Gentlemen, and UV Race were all playing that, and that was the gig where I was like, I'm gonna start tucking my shirt in, wearing tight black jeans, and being a punk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing is it's such a. You mentioned UV Race there and like Total Control and like there's just such like a constant turnover of bands. And then of course the generation of bands that you guys are from. And then there's also, I'm sure, the next generation below you now, right? Like it just feels like, I don't know, there's this constant replenishment of rock and roll. And there's never a dead period in music in the country, especially in Melbourne as a city.
Yeah, I agree. It kind of just always passes along and passes through because anyone who wants to start playing music, really, it's like punk's pretty accessible. Like, for example, all of us, like, you just play a couple of chords or whatever and you're going for it. Like, it's such a spirit-based thing. Like, obviously, there's people who can actually play and like are really talented and stuff like that. But for like a jumping in point, especially if you're like a younger person who's never played music, it's achievable.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like what other genre are the best records made by people like, in their early 20s? There's very few. Exactly. How about yourself, Gus? Like, who were some of the early bands that you got into?
Well, like the early punk bands I was into, it was like I was kind of into it when I was younger, like I said before, but then I kind of like dropped off for like 7 years and didn't play music or like do any of that. And then when I became of age and started going to the pub, when I started kind of watching shows around, but then like I watched the Cosmic Psychos documentary, Blokes You Can Trust.
Mm-hmm.
And that was fully like, that was the thing that was fully like, oh yeah, I'm like fucking really into this. Like got a fucking mullet because I wanted to look like in the 80s. And I was just like, yep, these cunts like drinking beer and just fucking, just having a good time. And I was like, fucking yeah, this is for me.
Yeah, one of the best bands ever. Like
Yeah.
They are truly, like and they're a band that kind of got over here, like not over. I don't know if they ever played Canada, but they certainly, they recorded that record with Butch Vig. They were like, they had a profile in America.
Yeah, Cosmic
Total-
Psychos are like the sky is the limit kind of thing. Like, yeah, seeing them do what they do and like seeing their documentary and seeing them play and listen to their music, it's like to me that was just the peak of everything. Like they were just the coolest. They are the coolest, and like, yeah, they're everything.
And really wild, you know, like that. Butch Vig was on. He's like, yeah, they drank a lot of beer. That was,
They still do.
They still
they
do.
still
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
Yeah, they still got it.
They also seem like a band that, you know, like you mentioned, they're still kind of around, you know, like they don't, it's not like a scene where there's like a turnover and there's like all new people. Like it's like you've mentioned, it's almost like this is being passed down and there is this sort of continuance.
Yeah, I think so. And like people like them are still interested in like bands and music that's going around now, and they really kind of try and support them and get interested in them and everything like that. So that really helps because they're not just like it's not like they reached a time period and then we're like, oh, let's just stop music. It's like they're just like we love music, we love drinking beers, let's still do all those things.
Mm-hmm. I read an interview with you where you mentioned, in a, you know, I guess all of you, the sort of tall poppy syndrome that you get in Australia when you start getting internationally well regarded. And it's kind of like we have that a little bit in Canada, but I don't think it's the same sort of way. But it's interesting. Like, I wonder if the Cosmic Psychos ever dealt with that, you know, when they were kind of going to America and getting this kind of love, because I can see that resentment. Toronto definitely has it more than I think the rest of Canada. Toronto, there's like a real resentment when a band kind of leaves, you know?
Yeah. I feel like just tall poppy syndrome in general, correct me if you guys think I'm wrong, but it's just like a big part of Australian culture because people just want everyone to be like, I think people just really love everyday stuff and people really love just like relatable and everyday kind of people, like a no frills kind of approach to stuff. So I think that's like a big part of it or whatever.
Yeah, like it feels like I remember going there as a young person, and I was like super into Noise Addict, Ben Lee's band when he was a little kid, and I remember asking people about him, and all these people were like, "No, we're not into Ben Lee anymore." And even when he was on the show, he mentioned how there was a time where he kind of got like cut off, and it took him like, you know, a good 20 years to get back into the good graces of Australia.
Yeah, seriously, because people, yeah, I don't know what exactly the thought process is, but I'm even before the band, it's like I feel the same and I felt the same. It's like anybody that was kind of popular, I was like just a blanket rule, like fuck them, pretty much, you know what I mean? Which I think is crap now because I obviously know better. Like it's like even to like to simplify it, right? So the other night I watched Star Wars for the first time, and it's like in my head I'd always written it off because it was so popular. Like I was like, oh, it's overrated. But then I watched it and I was like, this is pretty much the best movie I've seen in such a long time. And it was like a good reminder that just because stuff's popular or like has a reputation, it actually might just be the best thing ever, and that's why it's popular. But I think, it's easy to forget that.
Yeah, and I think, like you're saying, it's something that comes with age, you know, and I think comes with experience. I think of being in a band. Like, there's so much stuff that I gave bands shit for that now that I'm in a band, I'm like, oh fuck, that's why they did that. That is completely understandable.
Yeah, exactly, 100%.
So what were some of the local bands when you first started playing? Like, who'd you guys play with live? Like, what was your kind of scene? Like, was it, because you mentioned you're not really necessarily from Melbourne, so coming to the city, what was the scene like when you arrived?
Well, when we started playing, and before that, I think like a big band for everybody was Drunk Mums and a band called Dumb Punts. There was kind of a whole scene around them, and they were all just like really friendly people. They made really great music. I think they really inspired a bunch of current bands to play. And they were kind of like our inspiration in a way because they'd always play these like backyard house shows and would go to almost every gig they'd play. And like even bands like Peter Bibby from Perth, who's like all those people are kind of big for us, I think.
It's weird because like that's like, you know, as much as the Cosmic Cycles have a profile here, there's so much stuff that doesn't come over here, you know, and maybe I just don't have my ear attuned to it like in the way I should. But like it's like those bands you mentioned, like they're probably huge, but they just are. It's like the same way in Canada. There's so much stuff that doesn't ever get out of here.
Yeah. Well, I think I would even argue that they're not huge, but they're just huge for that, like for Melbourne and for the east coast of Australia, and just like, you know, like really like respected in as like a garage punk underground kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. What about like bands like Straight Jacket Nation, and you mentioned like UV Race? Like, how did they kind of fit into your world? Was that more like hardcore stuff, or is that like kind of separate scenes? Like, are these things kind of like coexisting, or is it sort of different scenes?
No, they're definitely different scenes. Like, don't know too much about like Melbourne hardcore, but like, I mean, yeah, with like the crossover of like UV race and that kind of scene, and kind of like they would play with, yeah, like the likes of Straight Jacket and kind of like different sounding bands. And I guess Straight Jacket would as well.
Mhm.
But I'd say like Straight Jacket are probably like, they're like the kind of the big dogs of like underground, like hardcore in Australia.
Well, and I guess they once again they were a band that toured too, right? Like they got, I remember meeting them like when they were just over here hanging out, like even not just even before the band even formed, like just kind of around. Like it's always amazing, like going to Australia, meeting people, just how deep people's music knowledge goes, and how like your band, like the fact that you guys are referencing this whole Sharpie thing, which is largely unheard of outside of, I think, Melbourne, and I think that is one of the coolest things I've ever heard about. Like, were you guys aware of that stuff growing up? Was that kind of like part of the popular culture? Is that something you guys had to dig to find?
Well, like this goes back again to like Drunk Mums and how influential they were on me. I saw the bass player Adam of Drunk Mums post something about it on Facebook, and it was like all these Sharpies photos, and I was like, whoa, what the fuck is this? Like, this is like, it's like Aussies with mullets, but like all of them have mullets. It's not like just one.
Yeah.
Like, they just one out here and there every now and then. But I was like, well, this whole community had mullets, and I was like, well, they look really cool. I don't know why I thought they looked so cool. So then I just did some like more and more research into them, and when I was like researching them, they sort of like identify as the only subculture to sort of have been generated out of Australia, which I really identified with growing up here. So I was just like really into all that stuff, and a few other bands in Melbourne were sort of referencing that stuff as well. So I guess like it's sort of just like we all sort of just were able to nurture that sort of Sharpie revival.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing how cool that culture is. Like, it is just like, I remember going to Vicious Sloth for the first time and just being hip to it and buying books, and just like just how deep it goes. It goes back to like the 50s, right? Like it's kind of I guess the equivalent of mods, but then it's also glam, and it's so much.
There's a lot of skinhead culture in that as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've read like it's sort of like influence between like the skinhead culture that they would see in fashion and like Clockwork Orange, and then like it would incorporate the European migrant sort of fashion as well, with like the shoes that they wore were all like custom made crazy leather boots, and then like a bit of like Aussie hooliganism to it as well.
Well, that's the thing also, like hearing about how this was like this scary subculture. Like the punks were afraid of the Sharpies, and the punks couldn't go to the suburbs because they were afraid they were going to get like stabbed by sharpened combs and stuff. Like, it's so wild. And then you see like footage of these bands, and it's just so cool. It's just everything about it's just so awesome, and it feels like there's a deep cultural wealth of rock and roll. And I was just wondering, where do you think that kind of comes from? Like, why do you think that strain of rock and roll is just survives today through yourselves?
I don't know. I don't know why rock and roll resonated so much with Australia back then. I've tried to put my finger on that for ages, like why like Australian bands were like, oh yeah, rock and roll, like let's run with that sort of thing, as opposed to like glam or something else. I think probably like it's hard because I wasn't around back then, but like maybe like AC/DC getting massive, that's just like real strong. You can identify with that. It's like, yeah, these guys are Aussies, and they went and like got really huge around the world, and like, this stuff plays all the time, and they're sort of like accepted by punks, accepted by rock and roll people who like pop music like AC/DC still. So yeah, maybe we can just credit all to AC/DC. I don't know.
As everybody would know, it's like, I don't think rock and roll and like loving that is exclusive to Australia, but I feel like in my vision of it, just from hearing my dad and mum talk about, it's like a huge working class country. This is my vision of it as well. Like, but it's like in my head, everyone's outside in the sun, like working hard, and I feel like that kind of music just like clicks in with that to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's like kind of sunburn, and it's like you're like, yeah.
Yeah.
Like an honest representation of the working class, which I guess, related to a lot of people.
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing about AC/DC. Like, as much as Angus Young, I suppose, is in a costume at the end of the day, but they presented themselves as real people. Like, they weren't Kiss or Queen or any number of these other bands. Like, they got up there and they looked like the people that I guess would be beside you in a bar.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, that kind of maybe circles back to the tall poppy syndrome thing. But people just like seeing people that represent themselves, and like it's relatable and it's real and it's raw. And it's no fancy stuff. Even though I like to admit I like fancy stuff a fair bit. But then there's, I guess as well, those bands like Skyhooks and stuff like that who did perform and were performative and like entertaining in their outfits and stuff like that. And I feel like they copped a lot of shit.
Yeah. And I think AC/DC even too, like, I remember that was the first concert I ever went to. I went to the Razor's Edge tour, and they had the cannon come out for those about to rock. They had the bell. They had like a lot of stage show at that point too. Like, it wasn't, I don't think it wasn't Bon Scott screaming at CBGBs, I guess, by 88.
Yeah. And also in saying all this, like, this is all just guesswork and like just very vague, like first thoughts of everything, if I'm honest, like what I'm talking about. This isn't like, I haven't researched this at all.
No, but it's interesting because like, to bring it back to punk, like AC/DC, when I was at Vicious Sloth last time, they showed me a poster, and then it's all like the colors of the Sex Pistols LP, and it must be from 76, I think. And it says AC/DC punk rock, like it is.
Yeah.
They were kind of, I guess, even called punk rock at certain points.
I've seen heaps of interviews where they just keep referring, before AC/DC sort of like got like blew up and they were still trying to like make their way over there. I've seen so many interviews where they're like, "Oh, what do you think about the punk scene? Like, what do you guys think about the other punk bands?" And like, I can sort of just see like Bon Scott dying a little bit inside every time they ask him. But yeah, it's because they were like, they moved to London when like the Sex Pistols were sort of like coming out, so they were just like, "Oh yeah, that's a punk band," So I feel like that must have been a bit hard for them to be, because I feel like they probably would have, I don't know, cared about how they sounded maybe a bit more than the Sex Pistols.
Well, there's that story about them going to CBGBs and just blowing everyone away, like just going out on stage and just like putting on the show of a lifetime. I think there was like an article in Mojo about it one time. I remember reading on tour. Like it's like sort of this storied show, and like also Lauren from this band, The Dogs, that was like from 68, but they were like one of the first Detroit punk bands and Detroit rock bands even. Their first show in LA was opening for AC/DC on their first show in Los Angeles too. So there is like this sort of deep, rooted punk thing. And I guess like, yeah, I imagine, they took it a little more seriously than some of the punk bands, but at the same time, there's that energy we're talking about. And I think, like you said, like I've always kind of speculated, maybe it's that AC/DC DNA in Australian music that keeps this rock and roll thing alive. And not that there's not rock bands everywhere and rock and roll bands everywhere, but it just feels like it's so vibrant still in Australia.
Yeah, I think so. And even bands like bands like Skeggs or whatever, who are really big in Australia. Mm-hmm. It's like, to me, it's like that's a punk rock band in their own way, and they're like they're holding the torch of rock in their own way as well. And it is kind of surf rock, it is kind of punk, but it's like I can really appreciate that in them, and they're really loved for that as well.
Yeah, I read an interview you dropped as an influence that Ceremony was like a band that was influential on yourselves, and I was just wondering where you first discovered them and stuff. And they're I think like a band that gets maligned by the music press, but their influence is just so massive, like as a hardcore band, and then whatever style they are now.
Yeah, I can't remember where exactly I first heard it, but it would have been, I don't know, I would have still been in my like teen years. But yeah, they're huge. They're just great. They're terrific. I never know if I'm pronouncing it right, but Roland Park, that album's so great.
Yeah, I think it's Roland Park. I think that's I think that's how you pronounce it.
I was just gonna say, like, after all these years, still don't know how to say that.
Yeah.
Well, I think most of us don't know how to say Bogan properly, so I think it all evens out in the end and stuff.
That was bang on.
Oh, was it? Good?
Yeah, that was perfect. And like Piss Jeans and stuff, that was huge for us. Like as the band was starting in the first couple of years of it, like We used to just sit in the kitchen and just play the same 3 tracks of them over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, they're another band that I think is really underappreciated in their influence and kind of like, taking hardcore and making music that was intense, but like not making it all about speed and like kind of like making the groove kind of important again.
Yeah, because God bless the groove.
God bless the groove. You need the groove at times, as much as the speed is important. You need, for all the rupture, there's got to be a little bit of groove eventually.
We need a speed groove genre to be popping right now.
Well, actually, I just did a Tony Molina. I don't know if you know Tony Molina, incredible songwriter dude, but he was just on and talked about this area of San Francisco metal where it became speed funk, where there was like this sort of. It doesn't sound great though. It does not. It does not feel well.
Speed funk to me sounds stressful. Like I just imagine people like trying to dance really funky but really quick.
Yeah, it definitely seems like one of those parts where it goes really manic in a Red Hot Chili Peppers song, but as a whole genre. You mentioned, how did the band come together? You were all living together kind of at the time, right? Or most of you were living together, right?
Take it away, Declan.
Yeah. All right. Unfortunately for Gus, he's not a founding member. I'm
not a founding member of my band, Gus. It's okay.
But yeah, so me, Bryce, Amy, and Callum, we were all living together in Melbourne, and me, Bryce, and Callum all played in bands already, and Amy had dabbled with some freestyle stuff over at some house parties. So we just were like, oh, let's start a house band and we'll play like house parties. That'll be like a cool thing, like this house that plays house parties, I guess.
Yeah.
And I guess like the original idea was to play like B-52 sort of music.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And then so Callum, he did like his own home recordings. So one day I got home from work and he'd set up like this recording setup in Amy's room, and we just came up with like 4 songs on the spot.
Is that the stuff that's on that very first EP?
Yeah.
So like, had you already decided the sound wasn't good? Because that first EP obviously is very much in line with the sound that you have now, not so much like the B-52s. Like, was that something you were surprised by, or was that already something you were like, let's be more of like a straight up rock band? I consider the B-52s a punk band too, by the way. So I'm not.
I think like the craziest thing about the first EP is the bass and the guitar were both DI'd. So I never heard the guitar track or bass track until it had been released, because we couldn't, we just didn't have the resources for that. So we just sort of, I guess, like went in and just like, I couldn't hear if I was playing the right notes or not. I was just like, yeah, sweet, let's just do this. And that's just like how it came out, I guess. Like, there's just no thought to it at all, I think.
What were those earlier bands that you mentioned that you were playing in sounds like?
Mine was like a drunk mum's riff-off band. We were garage. Yeah.
Okay.
Some punk songs, garage songs.
And like, so how long after that EP kind of gets, like, how does it circulate online? Because that got like a lot of love in the beginning too, right? Like right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just checked it on Bandcamp, and then just like shared it on our Facebooks or whatever, and chucked it out like that. And I don't really know what happened, but it just kind of got like some kind of life of its own. I think people were just sharing it around and having a sticky beak on Bandcamp and stuff like that.
And then it kind of feels like that's also like, once again, like we keep talking about how there's almost like waves of stuff happening, and it feels like there's this moment in Melbourne where there's like yourselves, there's like a changeover of scenes, and there's like this new wave of bands. Did you feel that energy at the time, or is that something that was already kind of happening when you started getting out there and playing live?
I personally didn't notice it because I just wasn't too aware of like the peripherals and like how everything was affecting everything in general. So yeah, I'm not sure.
How about yourself, Declan?
I don't know. Yeah, I think like as well, like with what Amy said, like, I probably would have paid more attention if I knew like all these years down the track I'd be like doing like a podcast on it. You know what I mean? But like
Yeah.
at the time when life was like that simple, it was just like chaotic and young, and it was just like, oh yeah, sweet, we have a gig this weekend. Like, who can I borrow a guitar and an amp off of? And like, you just don't. I don't know. I just wasn't really paying attention to anything else. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, what day of the week is it? Tuesday. Cool. I guess it's okay to have a beer. I don't know.
So where were you playing out first? Like, was it like, you know, all ages spaces, or is it more like clubs or bars or?
We played a lot of just like kind of any venue that would have us would play. Like if someone hit us up to play, we'd just say yes. But there was venues like Yaya's, which was just kind of this upstairs venue that have like a downstairs dance night or whatever. And they used to do these 2 a.m. slots. So we played a bunch of those. And this was when our set was like 10 minutes long to 15 minutes long. And we'd just like jump on for a bit and then get out of there. We played a bunch, just a bunch pretty much everywhere and anywhere. Like even just venues like Cherry Bar, which is just a rock and roll kind of tribute bar. I don't know if it exists anymore. And then the Curtain, just anywhere that would have us.
It feels like there's, you know, like you mentioned, there's this moment where it starts happening internationally. Like, was that something that brought stress for you, knowing that this was going to change? Like you mentioned how this band was so casual, like, but when that international success starts coming, like when you're playing South by Southwest and you're playing these sorts of like international festivals, like, was that completely joyful, or was there a stress attached to it? Because like I think coming out of punk, there's always a guilt with success.
I think so too. I felt a bit intimidated, and it did just feel really foreign to me. Like I still don't know anything like much about like magazines or radios or, you know, even festivals and venues, that all these iconic stuff that lots of people who are music fans or appreciate the music community at all, it's like they're really amazing to them and special to them, but it's still foreign to me. So it's kind of like intimidating because we get these offers to do these things. We'll go along to them and be like, yeah, I know this is a really great thing. I know this is important and I know this is special, but I actually just don't have the information behind it for it to mean as much as it should. And then as well, just feeling intimidated by being off home soil. Like I always feel most happy and comfortable when I'm down here. But so it was intense, but also super like we wanted it and it felt really good. And we had lots of fun and have lots of fun, but it is stressful and it is weird leaving like a smaller music scene and kind of like stepping into this thing, because you kind of question, you're like, oh, am I still a good person because I'm like taking on jobs like the big festivals that only pop bands play in my head? And like, you know, but I think a lot of that started with ignorance, and like I am in the place right now where I think that like all musicians are just musicians, and like it doesn't really matter what kind of genre you make if you're a sick cunt and if you like the right shit and you think the right way.
It's more about just who's a good person at the end of the day than, you know, like what music you make and what genre you slot into in this thing.
Yeah, definitely. But definitely a level of intimidation for sure.
It also feels like genre's breaking down, you know, like I have so many people on the show that are, you know, like are younger than myself. Like yourselves are definitely younger than myself too, but like where it just feels like the religious sort of adherence to like genre doesn't seem as important anymore. Like you don't have to, you know, be this sort of like strictly doom rock guy or strictly black metal person, or, you know, you can be in everything now.
Yeah, I think if you limit yourself to one genre, you're just fucking yourself up, because everything's so enjoyable. Like we all enjoy different stuff for different reasons. Like we all dip our toes in, like rap or pop or punk or garage or just straight up rock and roll, like whatever. It's all, you can find pleasure in each of them.
I think a lot of that came from the fact that people were limited by resources. To like you had to go to a record store and you could only buy like one thing, right?
True, yeah, true. Yeah, that's true actually. Yeah, with the internet, everyone can just literally dip into anything.
Yeah, like you could I today listened to stuff that there's no way I would have bought in my life.
Yeah.
But like it was just like, oh, well, I can. You know, it's all at my
fingertips. That's true. What do you think about that? Do you think it's a positive thing that there's like streaming services and stuff like that? Or do you think that what's your opinion?
Well, I use them, so I think any negative opinion I have towards them would be based in hypocrisy. But I think like, you know, I'm like someone who's like, you know, like I got like too many records in this place. Like,
whoa,
I'm obsessed with collecting records, but at the same time, it's like you know, like Dead Kennedy said, give me convenience or give me death. Like we're not, no one's going to put this genie back in the bottle now. We all want, like, I want to have every song in the world in my pocket. Like, how could you not? I can't play
Yeah,
this shit with
exactly. Yeah. And I guess it's like anything, there's like positive and negative to it. Like, for example, for us with Bandcamp and that, it's like if we had to do it traditional way without the internet, it'd just be impossible for us to be in this position now, because people could just click on it, and if they thought it was shit, they could move on, or if they liked it, they could continue being interested in us. Whereas, yeah.
Well, it's funny, like, and now technology has made this a lot easier, like you're saying, but like how many people have come on this podcast and talked about just how the economics reality of things change things, like the fact that people in certain scenes had a lot of money, and so that's why there's a lot of records from these scenes, because these people could afford to put out these records and could afford good gear and to record, because this shit was crazy expensive back then. And
Yeah.
and like you're saying, like, you know, bands that with like yourselves that had no resources, like how would you get your shit out there if it wasn't for this free kind of system?
Yeah, exactly. Even stuff like, you know, as we all know what everyone's thoughts are about social media, it's like that's also super helpful, because you can just kind of like find music that you wouldn't have found without it. Like it's like a weird record store or social event in your little stupid pocket.
Yeah. Oh, and it's also like you can crowdsource a scene now. Like you could be an artist who's not necessarily very popular in your hometown, like, but there might be enough people around the world. Like I'm in a swear word band. I'm 300 pounds and I'm bald. Like I've built a career in music. I shouldn't be able to do this, but because of the internet, I was able to do it.
I swear word, man.
You know, like that's, but this is like, we like live in this world where, yeah, like I see bands, a lot of bands complain about these payouts, and they're horrible what these companies pay us. But also at the same time, like this technology has allowed me to have this career that I don't think I would have had in you know, certainly not the way I did in the old world.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's why consumerism and stuff's so fucking weird. But like even, you know, getting say like an interface or a couple of mic cables or whatever, it's like it's cost a lot of money, but I'm sure as hell it didn't. It's way more cheaper than what it would have been. So it's like, yeah, it's like literally if you can save up enough for that, it's like you can pretty much record at home, and then just go from there, chuck it online for free, and it's like that's pretty special and pretty dope. Even though it has its downfall, it's great too.
Yeah, and it's amazing to see how much stuff, like, you know, yourselves, like you recorded in your house and put out this tape, and or not even a tape, you put out these files, and they became, you know, they launched a band. But like, you know, in the same way Chief Keef did the same thing, you know, and it's like all these artists that otherwise we might not have heard that we're now able to hear, you know. And I just I don't know, as much as I'm pessimistic about it and as much as I love being a gatekeeper at a record store kind of vibe, I think at the same time it's like, who does that serve at the end of the day?
Yeah, exactly.
Was it hard to kind of be creative for you during this pandemic thing? Because I have found that near impossible.
It was actually really good for me last time. Well, like, because we're in our 6th lockdown at the moment in Victoria. Personally, it was good because I function pretty slowly and I'm pretty lazy. Like, I'm a pretty lazy person. So like, even if we had band practice, like we all used to live together, even if we had band practice like twice a week, I'd be like, fuck that. I'm not touching my bass unless I absolutely have to. Like fucking, yeah, because I'm just a piece of shit. But like being locked down, yeah, because I'm a bass player, a real piece of shit. Being locked down, being like so fucking bored, it was like, you know, I'd kind of just chip away at it like every day, even just for like 10 or 20 minutes, have a like little noodle around. And managed to like write a fair few songs, which was dope. Got off my fucking ass and finally did something. But yeah, personally, it was good.
Yeah, I just found it was like it's hard to get excited. You know, like that was the hardest thing. And like writing exciting music, it's hard to get excited to get there, to write stuff. But I definitely, I definitely function better not on tour as a human being.
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey.
Well, this has been a lot of fun, and anytime you all or any of you want to come back on here and bullshit about music, you know the door is always open.
Cool.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
That's dope. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you, Declan, Amy, and Gus for coming on the show. And Bryce, I'm looking at you when they come back for this part 2. Or maybe some will come back. Who knows? Who knows? All right, coming up later on this week on the show, we got another episode of The Splits dropping. That's right, I've been putting out these new Splits episodes. I think I've only done one so far. But this is the number 2 where we kind of get 2 people back on the show, meeting up for the first time. You know, I think that's going to be the gimmick of this thing. I'm going to try and do it where everyone's meeting up for the first time. So for the first time, meeting up to celebrate the release of one of the greatest Canadian records ever, Hardcore 81 by DOA, returning to the show for the 3rd time, Joey Shithead, Joey Keithley. I guess, you know, once you become an elected member of government, you should probably drop the shithead. Maybe I should drop the shit, I should say. Joey Keithley will be here with John Ross Bowie, coming back to the show, a DOA super fan and a Hardcore 81 aficionado, and the 2 of us get a chat with the legend, with Joey. And John is a legend as well. And anyway, this is a fun episode. I cannot wait for you to hear it. And check out John's podcast, Household Faces. A great podcast interviewing character actors and stuff. Anyway, we'll talk about it more next week. That's it for the show. Remember, as always, Black Lives Matter. The lives of Indigenous peoples matter. You need to protect trans kids. We need to help trans people protect themselves. We need to stop hate and violence towards Asian people and people of different faiths, and just, you know, stop trying to control women's or people with uteruses bodies, because, you know what, like, at the end of the day, this shit isn't political. This is fascism. This is you know, Nazi bullshit. These are human rights issues that we're talking about. People needing to be free. And so anyone that's stopping that, they're not engaged in politics. They're engaged in something completely different. They're engaged in hate. And anyway, yeah. So, you know, get involved. Do something. If you see something happening around you that you don't agree with, say something, do something. Are there organizations that are doing great work? Donate your time, donate your money, donate what you can, just be involved. Go there and make your own culture, because anyone can do this bullshit. Start a podcast, start a fanzine, whatever it takes, whatever. Just do it. Try meditating maybe once or twice. It might work. I didn't believe in it, and it works for me. And sign your organ donor cards, because it can help someone live way longer. And why not? You don't need that shit when they come looking for it. And that's about it. Stay sane. Stay safe. Try and stay sane, I should say. Sometimes you can't help it, but try. And I will see you on the next episode. Thanks for listening.